All right. Now, when we ended last week, we were looking at chapter 8, verses 1 to 6, and Paul tells the Corinthians there about the generosity of the Macedonian churches to stimulate the Corinthians to carry out what they had earlier shown themselves ready to do. So they'd indicated, we're in. And so he's stimulating them to go ahead and finish that, bring that to completion. The Macedonians, he tells them, they not only gave in keeping with their ability, which is all anyone could expect, but they went above and beyond what could be expected in their situation. In other words, their generosity was really stunning. It was extraordinary. And moreover, the Macedonians, they didn't have to be coaxed into contributing. On the contrary, they urgently pleaded with Paul for the right or the privilege of participating in the collection. So that's where we ended last week. And we see that in verse 5 here, not only did the Macedonians give to this collection as Paul had hoped. He certainly wanted them to contribute so that would increase the amount that he could take down for the poor Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. But they did so as a result of having first dedicated themselves to the Lord and also to his apostles, as God would have. In other words, their giving wasn't simply out of compassion. It wasn't simply out of compassion, but it was motivated by their devotion to Christ and their commitment to Christ's servants, Paul and his companions. See, so they saw something more in this. Giving out of compassion is good and right. But they saw in this collection that was being taken up, they saw that this was a work of Christ. And so that is what is motivating them to give. Not simply that, not out of the compassion, but because this is from their devotion to Jesus and to his apostles that drives them. And given this tremendous example on the part of the Macedonians, Paul then urges Titus to go ahead and complete the collection in Corinth, something he apparently had begun doing after their favorable response to that severe or tearful letter that Titus had delivered to them. So they received that letter well, and then in response to that, Titus had begun organizing and getting the collection ready. So Paul is now urging him to go ahead and complete that collection. So he's sending Titus back, and he's going to send him back with this letter that he's writing, 2 Corinthians. All right, in chapter 8, verse 7 to 12, he says, "Now as you abound in everything, in faith, in word, in knowledge, in all earnestness, and in the love from us that is in you." That little asterisk, there's a textual issue. Some manuscripts read, "and your love for us." But I think more likely he's saying, the more difficult reading is, "and in the love from us that is in you." So now as you abound in everything, in faith, in word, in knowledge, in all earnestness, and in the love from us that is in you, see that you also abound in this grace, in your participation in this contribution. I say this not as a command, but to prove by the earnestness of others the reality of your love also. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. On account of you, he became poor, though being rich, so that you, by means of that poverty, might become rich. And so I am giving an opinion in this matter, for this is beneficial for you who previously began last year not only the doing, but also the willing. But now also complete the doing, so that just as there is eagerness in the willing, so also in the completing from what you have. For if the eagerness is already there, that is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one has not or does not have. Okay, as they excel in many things there in Corinth, and he says in faith, in word, or you could say speech, in knowledge, and there he's probably referring to the spiritual gifts. that you see in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 5 and chapter 12, verses 8 and 9. He says, as you excel in faith and word and knowledge, in earnestness. And I think there he's probably referring to their earnestness regarding Paul following Titus's visit with that severe letter, where they had come to see and now they were all on board in earnest for Paul. And he says, in earnestness and in their love for Christ and fellow believers that was instilled in them by Paul and his companions. So he says, as you excel in all of these things, he then exhorts them to excel in this act of benevolence. In keeping with how you excel in those things, excel in your contribution, in your participation in this act of benevolence. And he makes clear that he's not commanding them to do that, but he's encouraging them to take the opportunity to show by the standard of the Macedonian response. All right, so the Macedonians, they gave in a tremendous way, relative to their poverty. They gave very generously, so he's encouraging them to take this opportunity to show by the standard of that response the genuineness of their love for the Lord and fellow Christians. See, love, it's not simply talk. Right? You say, well, I feel I love this person. Okay, that's right. There is this commitment to the welfare of another person. That is what biblical love is. But it doesn't simply say things and then allow the object of your love to suffer when you can bless them. You see, it's not simply talk. It finds expression in action. Right? That's what real love is. And then Paul cites the Lord as the finest example of one who showed eagerness and generosity in giving as a demonstration of his love. Right? He gave. And that's a real demonstration. He gave up the glory of his heavenly existence to come to this sinful world and ultimately to be brutalized and crucified. Right? Now that's some giving in order to bless other people. Right? So he says, on account of you, he became poor. So that you, by means of that poverty, you might become rich. And so he's showing them this idea of the nature of love and how love gives. And love acts that way. It's not simply talk. It finds expression in action. And then Paul urges them to go ahead and complete from what they have, you see, according to their means, the collection that they had previously begun. So they had a desire to do it. They were ready to do this. And so he's telling them to go ahead and bring that to completion. And he points out that the acceptability of the gift in God's eyes, it's judged according to what one has. Okay? It's not something, it's not some absolute scale. It's judged according to what one has. In other words, generosity is always relative. Right? It's always relative. It takes into consideration both the needs and the ability of the giver. They need not balk, you see, or hesitate over the actual size of the gift, because the size of the gift is not the test of the gift's acceptability. It's not the size, you see, judged absolutely. That's not what it's about. If they are eager to give, right? If they're eager to give, they will naturally give what they can, and that will then be acceptable, whatever the amount. Right? It's a question of my desire and eagerness to give. And if that's the case, well, I'm going to give what I can. I'm going to say, well, I can't give all that because my kids will starve. I can't. Okay. We have needs ourselves, but I'm going to give what I can, what I assess in this situation is good and generous and right, if I'm eager to do it. So then that way the gift is acceptable, and it doesn't matter what the amount is, because he doesn't want people, like people sometimes won't sing. I won't sing because I can't really sing well. I don't want to give because I don't have a lot to give. Well, that's just not how to look at it, right? That's not how to look at it, because you won't give as much as some people. But who cares? Right? It's the eagerness. I want to do this because I love the Lord Jesus and I want to help his servants who are suffering. And then he says in 13 to 15, for it is not that there should be relief to others and affliction to you. Rather, it is a matter of equality. Your abundance at the present time is for the need of those saints, that the abundance of those saints may also be for your need, so that there may be equality. As it has been written, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little. So here they shouldn't balk or hesitate to participate in the contribution over the notion that Christian giving is a one-way street that flows only to some privileged group. You see, in this case, the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. They shouldn't resist that, because no, Christian giving is something that goes only to this elite or privileged group. Rather, Christian giving, it's a matter of equality in that all Christians are of equal importance. Right? Their present relative abundance is to supply the current need of the poor saints in Jerusalem. And if the shoe is on the other foot, well, then the saints in Jerusalem will supply the needs of the Corinthians. See, that's what he's talking about. It is not a call to equalize wealth among Christians, but it's a reassurance of the equality of obligation. You see, it's dealing with the equality of obligation. Not that this is flowing, that Christian giving flows in as a one-way street to some privileged group. No. Everybody's equal. When they have more in relative abundance, it'll flow this way. And right now in the situation, it's a call for it to flow that way. And it's a defense of the collection that he's taking against the idea that it's somehow, for this privilege of Jewish Christians, that because they're the root and that kind of thing, that they should get this. And the collections, it's just one example. It's just one specific example of the general Christian obligation to meet one another's material needs. Right? We are a family. We don't allow somebody to be without and to starve and to do all this kind of thing. You wouldn't do that with your physical family. And so that's the idea. And this interpretation that I'm saying to you of how to understand the equality there, that's what Paul is talking about, an equality of obligation. You see, in that all are of equal value. It's supported because Paul elsewhere, he instructs in 1 Timothy 6:17 to 19, he tells the wealthy there to be generous. He tells them to be generous. He doesn't tell them to equalize their wealth. And throughout church history, you see further confirmation that this is the right way to understand that, because you don't see differences in wealth among Christians, no drive to equalize that in church history. In other words, the fact there are wealthier and less wealthy Christians, you never see churches saying, hey, that's something wrong, we got to work on that. We got to make sure we get everybody to the same level. Okay? That's not what he's talking about. And you can see that, I think, for that. Then he cites Exodus 16:18, which is referring to the Lord's provision of manna. And he cites that for the point that provision is according to need. Okay? And people have different needs at different times. And here's the perfect example. They've been enduring these famines which hadn't affected where they were. And he says, so these guys are really hurting. And so we have a contribution where we're going to help our Jewish brothers and sisters from the Gentiles. And so we should go ahead and give it to them. And as instruments of God's provisions, Christians are to meet one another's needs. Right? We're to be sensitive to that. And this is what he's telling them. And then he says in 8:16 to 24, but thanks be to God who put the same earnestness for you into the heart of Titus. Because he's going to be sending Titus with 2 Corinthians. For he welcomed our urging, and being extremely earnest, he went out to you of his own accord. So now Titus is back with Paul in Macedonia. Paul's writing 2 Corinthians. He's getting ready to send Titus back to help finalize the collection. And he's going to be coming with this letter. He says, being extremely earnest, he went out to you of his own accord. And we sent with him the brother whose praise in the gospel is throughout all the churches. And not only that, he has also been elected by the churches to be our traveling companion in this grace, which is being administered by us to the glory of the Lord himself and to show our eagerness to help. We are arranging this lest someone should fault us in reference to this large sum being administered by us. For we consider the right thing not only before the Lord, but also before men. And we sent with them, with Titus and this other brother, we sent with them this third brother. We sent with them our brother whom we proved in many ways at many times to be earnest, and who is now much more earnest because of his great confidence in you. If there's any question about Titus, he's my partner and co-worker for you. If there's a question regarding our brothers, they are apostles or messengers of the churches, the glory of Christ. Therefore, show them in the presence of the churches the demonstration of your love and of our boasting on your behalf. So Paul here, he commends the three brothers who are to go to Corinth, to come to Corinth to receive the collection. And the first of them is Titus. Now they know Titus well, right? Titus was just there with the severe letter. So they know Titus well, and Paul thanks God that Titus shares Paul's heart and his concern for the Corinthians. And that concern was born of God's work in Titus's life. Right? That's fruit of God's work in his life, that he has this affection and this love for these fellow Christians in Corinth. Who did that? Who caused that in Titus's life? Well, that's the work of God. And this concern for them is highlighted by the fact that Titus needed no persuasion to make that considerable journey back to them, right? I mean, I'm just thinking, these guys are hoofing all over the place. Why don't you walk 100 miles or 200 miles or whatever it is? Yeah, go ahead back down there. I just been there, man. Walk back up, go ahead. But no, he's eager to go. Right? And that reflects his love for them. And he sees what's going on. Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm going to go back there. I think the brothers need that. I think this will be a good thing for them. So my own comfort in that, that's nothing. This will be a blessing to them. And it'll be a glory to the Lord. So that's what he's doing. He volunteered for the assignment. And he then commends the brother whose praise in the gospel is throughout all the churches. I don't know if he's referring to the Macedonian churches, but he says his praise is to all the churches. And this brother was a real friend of the cause of the gospel, whoever he is. Now, whether that was as a preacher or in a more general supportive role, I don't know. But he was known to them. He was known. And Paul just didn't tell us his name. But he was certainly known to them. In addition, he had been chosen by the churches. He doesn't say which churches. But he'd been chosen by the churches to accompany Paul's group in the administration of the collection. Right? So he's going to be there as somebody who's with Paul and them in doing this. Now, second part of verse 19 provides us a glimpse of the purpose of the collection. He says it was for the glory of the Lord, to the glory of the Lord, or for the glory of the Lord, in that this is this collection from Gentiles going to Jewish Christians in Jerusalem, this is a tangible expression, you see, of the unity of Jew and Gentile in the cross. You see, as I said, Paul in Ephesians 2, chapter 2, where he talks about that the dividing wall of hostility was broken down, creating one new man out of two, out of Gentile and Jew. See, so Christ has forged this union from Jews and Gentiles in the cross, and they see this Gentile contribution to these poor Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. They see that, you see, as a tangible expression of that unity. That's why it has such theological import. It is benevolence, of course, but it's much larger than that. It is a participation in this large work of God here, manifesting the unity that He has brought about among all people, particularly symbolized in the great divide of Jew and Gentile. But He has brought all people together. He has transcended all divisions between people, you see, in the cross of Christ. So that's why bringing divisions into the church and bickering, you see, you could see if Jews and Gentiles kept warring with each other. Yes, but you did this. Yes, but you did that. You did that. No. One. See, in the cross of Christ, we have transcended those things. And that's what they recognized. They saw that was that tangible expression. And also it was a way for the Gentile churches to express their goodwill toward the Jewish brothers by showing their eagerness to help. It just helps solidify the bond that I see. Wow, this is something. We're down here and we've had this, ages-long division. And here, I hear you saying that about, but now they're actually sacrificing to bless us. Oh, man, I'm starting to really feel it. You see, I'm starting to feel something of a bond and something of their love there. So Paul points out that they appointed men of such impeccable credentials to receive the gift and to carry it to Jerusalem. They did that to head off any accusations or any charges, you see, of impropriety in their handling of such a large sum. Right? And that's what he says here. We consider the right thing not only before the Lord, but also before men. He did not want the nobleness of what they were doing, the greatness of this contribution, to be marred or tainted by accusations that people are skimming. They're taking this money. You know how much money Paul's lugging around? Right? Now, that's how we are, right? Because we know people. And people do all kinds of crazy stuff for money. They just lose their mind. Right? I mean, they kill you for a pair of shoes, do anything. It's just crazy. And so when you get money involved, especially it's a substantial sum of money, everybody's going to be saying, "Oh, no, no. Yeah, they're taking it all right. Yeah, they're taking it. They're getting rich off it." Right? Right? If you try to do anything. So he wants to head that off because that would taint the beauty of this thing. And so that's what Paul is saying here. See? If there's any, so he says that, look, he wants to stop that. He wants to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, right, so that it won't be sullied by those accusations. So he's guarding against that up front. And then Paul commends the third brother by saying that he had in many ways proven to be earnest, or you could say enthusiastic or focused. And he was even more so now because of his confidence in the Corinthians, see that they're going to come through. He'd heard this reassuring report from Titus of how they had responded to the severe letter. So now he's even more earnest about going and participating in this finalizing of their participation in this great collection. And in verse 23, he sums up the credentials of these delegates. He says, look, if there's any question about Titus, they know Titus well, but if there's any question about it, he's Paul's partner and co-worker for the Corinthians. Okay? So you guys know Titus, so nobody have any qualms about that. If there's any question about the brothers, well, they're messengers, taking apostles in a general sense. They are messengers of the churches, Macedonian churches? Don't know. But they're messengers of the churches, and because of their lives and ministry, they are the glory of Christ or a credit to Christ. So he's saying these people are good, faithful brothers. Okay? And you like that, right? When somebody comes to you you don't know, of course they know Titus, and they may even know these other guys, but you like that. You like somebody you know who's faithful and serious, and they come to you and they say, this is a good brother. Okay? This is not putting down other people, but you like to have somebody say, okay, all right, I know this brother. I trust this brother's judgment and assessment. And he tells me this is a good brother. You see, this guy loves the Lord. That's good. And I think that's what you see going on here. So Paul here, so he urges them in verse 24 to show these men their love and to vindicate Paul's boasting about them in the presence of the churches. So that clause, it means either in the presence of all the churches, so that all the churches can see it as though these things are being done out in the open before all the churches, or it means in the presence of the churches from which those particular delegates came. I don't know. But one or the other. But he's saying here, show them in the presence of the church demonstration of your love and of our boasting. Vindicate our boasting on your behalf. Because I say, despite all the struggles Paul has had, he talks up the Corinthians. He focuses on the positive among the Corinthians. And he talks them up to the brothers there. And he says in chapter 9, 1-5, so concerning the ministry to the saints, it is not necessary for me to write to you, for I know your eagerness, which I boast about on your behalf to the Macedonians, saying that Achaia has been prepared since last year, and your zeal stirred up the majority. But I sent the brothers so that our boast on your behalf should not be empty in this respect, so that you are prepared, as I said, lest if the Macedonians should come with me and find you unprepared, we, lest I mention you, be disgraced in this eventuality. Therefore, I considered it necessary to urge the brothers that they go on ahead to you and arrange in advance the blessing you promised. This will thus be ready as a blessing and not as an extortion. Okay, so Paul, he expresses his confidence in them. See, again, in the Corinthians, that they're going to participate, they're going to do this. He expresses his confidence, saying that there's no need to write to them about the collection because he knows that they have long been ready to give. Right? They've long been ready to give. In fact, he had boasted to the Macedonians, right, who have now given so generously and sacrificially. He had boasted to the Macedonians that those in Achaia, that they were ready to give since last year. Right? And you see in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1-4, you see that they were already talking about giving. Right? So they had said, oh, yeah, we want in on that. So they were already talking about that doing. And this commitment on their part, that helped to stir the Macedonians. So he said, yeah, the Corinthians are in. Wow, you got to let us in. We want to give to this. So he helped to stir them. But the Macedonians, see, they have now completed their contribution. So they had moved beyond a desire to give and all this, and they'd gone through all that was necessary to collect up and to get ready and to actually make the contribution. While the Corinthians, they hadn't yet followed through on their commitment. They're talking about it, they want to do it, they're going to do it, but they hadn't yet coughed up. You see, they hadn't actually given it. So while it wasn't necessary for Paul to write to the Corinthians about participating in the collection, they've long made clear that they wanted to participate in the collection. It is necessary to write about this present mission of Titus and the two brothers who are coming with 2 Corinthians. It's necessary to write about that. They are coming to ensure that the Corinthians' good intentions are actually followed by action. Okay, so this is the rubber meets the road now. They're coming and they're going to go ahead and take the collection. Okay, to finalize the collection. And Paul is sending the brothers to organize the gift in advance of his coming so that that gift will be ready and everything will already have been done when he arrives. Otherwise, if some of the Macedonians who come with him, and some did, as you see in Acts chapter 20, verses 2-6, well, then he and the Corinthians will be disgraced if they're unprepared. Right? If they haven't already done this, Paul, because his misplaced confidence in his brothers and sisters in Corinth, and the Corinthians because of their failure to follow through on their noble promise. They'd said, yeah, we're in. So we're going to go ahead and finalize this thing before I get there. You see, otherwise, if it's not finalized before I get there, well then, all of my talk about you, it's going to make me look bad, or I'm just going to feel bad about it. And you're going to feel bad because you had said you're going to participate in it, and now you're not. Okay, or at least you're balking about it or slow to it. See, in that case, the entire sense, you see, of the partnership in Christ that Paul hopes to convey in the collection, will be damaged. And that's what he says, just don't do that. And then if they go ahead, if they go ahead and get the contribution, it's all done, just to be handed to be carried. If they go ahead and do that and it's all done before Paul arrives, well then, it will then be ready, as something freely given. When he says there, this will thus be ready as a blessing. It will be then ready as something that is freely given, a gift of love. If on the other hand, if they won't give and they won't finalize this until Paul gets there, well, that has a connotation of reluctance, right? We've been talking about this for a long time. Titus began it after your proper response to the severe letter. I'm sending him down there now. If I get down there and you guys still haven't actually given the money, well, now it's looking like you don't really want to give the money, right? It's looking like you're not really eager to give this money. And if you do that, that reluctance suggests, that he says it will then be ready as a blessing and not as an extortion, because that reluctance, it takes on the sense that you're only going to give if you get squeezed. You see? If it's already ready, well, then it seems how freely you're willing to do it, and it takes on this idea of it's a love offering and you really want to do it. If you keep balking and being reluctant until I get there and then you cough up, well, then it's like you had to be forced to do it. And that taints it. You see, it's like you didn't really want it. You weren't really eager to do it. And so that's what he means by this, be ready as a blessing and not as an extortion. You see, not as something that we took from you or kind of forced you to give. And then he says in 9:6-10, and note this, the one who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And the one who sows in blessing ways will also reap in blessing ways. Now let me say something about that. To sow and reap in blessing ways. To sow in blessing ways is to sow generously or bountifully or abundantly, however your translation will read it. That's what that means. But the word he uses is eulogia, which is blessing. And so I didn't want to conceal that. You see, so it's a plural form of that. So I said in blessing ways, right? But it means bountifully, generously in this context, okay? So, but I just didn't want to hide that. All right. Let each one give as he determined in his heart, not with grief or out of compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to cause all grace to abound to you, so that in all things, always having all sufficiency, you may abound in every good work. As it is written, he scattered widely, he gave to the poor, his righteousness remains forever. Now the one who provides seed for the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed and will increase the fruits of your righteousness. So Paul reminds them that their level of generosity, you see, will in some sense, in some way, be reflected back to them. Now, there's a lot of danger here, see, like going into quid pro quo and send in so much money and make it an investment, Like instead of investing in Ford Motor Company, you give money here and the Lord will pay. It's a really wise investment. You see how ugly that gets? But he's simply saying here that there's in some way that their generosity will be reflected back to them. The more they love God as reflected in their generosity toward God's needy children. The more they love God, you see, the more God will bless them. Now, even that, right? We understand that God is sovereign, and He may have reasons and times not to act that way, right? I mean, if Job teaches us anything, it teaches us that. But this is a general principle. You see that as you express your love for God, you have deeper love for God, well, God will then bless them accordingly. And part of generosity is that giving be voluntary. Right? Giving be voluntary. Compulsion negates generosity. All right? Compulsion negates generosity. The one who gives to avoid censure, to avoid the stink eye from people. You see, the one who gives for that reason isn't being generous. He or she is simply being forced, strong-armed, to give what they don't want to give. Right? That's not generosity. That's compulsion. And that's what God is talking about here. God loves a cheerful giver because that kind of giving, you see, it's a reflection of a heart that is devoted to Him. He doesn't need it. But it's simply an indication when one gives generously because one is a Christian, when one gives because he sees that the Lord he serves calls him to give. Well, that is a reflection of a heart that is surrendered to God. That's what's pleasing to God. And so that's what he's talking about. And they need to remember that the God they serve is able to supply them with everything they need to abound in all good works. So this kind of giving, this is a good work. He can provide whatever blessings they need to do good works. Be they spiritual blessings, be they transformed hearts, or be they material things. Right? And as the reference here in Psalm, it's 112:9, but in the Septuagint, which is where the quote is taken from, it's Psalm 111:9. But that quote from the Psalm indicates that giving generously to the poor, that is a righteous deed in the eyes of God. And that is what this collection involves. Right? Giving generously to the poor. And the point is that they ought not conclude that they are unable to participate in the collection. You see some hints of that concern in chapter 8, verse 12. God can provide the way. I just can't do that. I can't do that. God can provide the way. Do you think God is not big enough to provide what you need, whether it be spiritual transformation, whether it be the material things to provide? You think He can't make it so you can participate in this noble act? He can do that, you see. And so that's the point. They ought not conclude that they can't participate. I just can't, I don't have whatever it is. Right? God can provide the way. And just look at what He did to the Macedonians. You think you're worse off than they were? They were in terrible affliction. They were in extreme poverty. And they gave like mad. Now, how do you think they did that? Well, God did it. God put in their heart this love and this desire, and He made it so they were willing to give generously despite their circumstance. He says, so don't tell me that God can't do that for you. He can provide everything you need for participation in this good work. God gave them the grace to give generously in the midst of their extreme poverty. And He says, the one who feeds the sower, who provides bread, and provides what he needs to sow, He will likewise care for them and provide them, the Corinthians, and provide them with plenty of what they need. Here indicated multiplied seed. Plenty of what they need to participate in the collection. He will do it. So don't write it off and say that it's something I can't do, I'm not doing. God will provide that. He will also increase the yield of positive results of their giving. You see where He says, and will increase the fruits of your righteousness. Giving to the poor from that psalm is a righteous thing. And so God will also take and He will increase the yield or the positive results that flow from your giving, your participation in this work of righteousness. He will magnify the effect. And see, this is what he then goes on and talks about in 11 to 15. He says, you are enriched in every way. He switches to present tense now to show his certainty of what God is going to do for them. He says, you are enriched in every way for all generosity, which produces through us thanksgiving to God. For the administration of this service is not only making up the lackings of the saints, but is also abounding through many thanksgivings to God. Because of the proof provided by this ministry, they, the Jewish Christians, glorify God for the submission accompanying your confession to the gospel of Christ and for the generosity of your sharing toward them and toward everyone. And in their prayers on your behalf, they long for you on account of the surpassing grace of God bestowed upon you. Thanks to God for this indescribable gift. And so he's talking about how God is going to take and expand the fruit of their righteousness, the fruit, the good things of their participating in this. He's going to wind up leading to all of these things, great and glorious and mind-blowing things. And so as I say, Paul switches to the present tense, see, indicating his confidence. You see that they will receive generosity producing grace. And that's why many translate this as future. It is a present tense. I say Paul is doing that to show his certainty of how God is going to work in their situation. But because it's referring to something God will do, you will have many who will translate it as a future. But that is what's behind that. And this generosity on their part will, through this collection, it will not only meet the needs of God's children in Judea, but it's going to produce abounding through many thanksgivings to God. Isn't that a great thing? When you are able to do something that produces in people's lives praise and thanksgiving to God. So this is what's going. He says, when these suffering, hungry Jewish Christians receive this blessing that we're collecting from the Gentile churches, praise to God. Thank you. Thank you. You see, that's a great thing. And it's one of the things you see that will be happening. And Paul envisions that, you see, God will be glorified for the Corinthians' faithfulness to the gospel as evidence, you see, in their generosity toward the needy saints. He's being glorified by that. And I'll pick up there, Lord willing, next week. Thanks for coming.